What can they afford to bring in if you're trying to bring in an offensive lineman, if you're trying to bring in a defensive tackle, which is something I suspect they'll do. You like your frontline starters, but I imagine they're going to be interested in bringing in maybe a depth piece at defensive tackle. I would think on the heels of this spring game, again, not overreacting to any one thing we saw in the spring game, but rather the culmination of things we saw leading up to that day and then the day itself. I think, Tom, it's probably pretty clear now they need to bring in another number one wide receiver. Benson's your answer. I'm going to breathe a bit of a sigh of relief. I suspect he's going to be okay, everybody. I know a lot of people in the stadium thought that was an ACL and thought he was done. I'm not hearing that, guys. So I feel like he's going to be somebody you can count on come fall. Let's just operate under the assumption that he's going to be good to go when we start up fall camp. And if that's the case, good. You got a guy that you really like. I don't know that you've got other guys that you really like besides Ja'Kai Douglas. And I'll be honest with you, I'm not trying to besmirch Ja'Kai Douglas, but he can't be your two. He cannot be your two. And I'm not seeing the growth from Akeem at this juncture that I would have liked to have seen. Now, can that change? It can. I mean, again, he's got the entire offseason. All the receivers that remain have the entire offseason to work on catching the damn ball. And that's got to get better because you heard me warn you about this the first week of camp. I steady mentioned it in the middle of camp. And if you watched it on Saturday, you know what I'm talking about. There are too many drops out there. The ball hits the ground too much.
Yeah, I think if not a number one receiver, then another starting caliber receiver climbs up towards the top of the list. I think defensive interior is at the top of the list. And then there's a sliding scale based upon what's available. You know, is it a rotational player or is it a starter at the following three positions? Well, I want a starter. You know, you could say, for example, I'm just throwing positions out there. Offensive tackle, linebacker, safety. I don't need another depth piece. One of those three positions, if there's a kid that likes us that is a starter, let's put him up towards the top of the list. I had some concerns about receiver from the practices that I saw, but I'm not the skill position guy, and I got to see two of them, so I'm spending more time in the trenches. I am watching 11 on 11s. But after that performance on Saturday, when Malik goes down, and he's clearly your best receiver, when he goes down and you have to exist in a world, even if it is a showcase, of a quarter or whatever the length of time that it was, and he's not out there in the rotation, you're thinking, well, where's the answer going to come from? And you have to, if you're a coach trying to build a championship contender here, take a look at that contingency for the fall and say, do I have one? Do I have a contingency plan if Malik Benson were to miss a series, a quarter, or a game in the fall? And if so, what is that plan? And is it acceptable? And I think the answer you're going to get in the next week or so, we'll see. For me personally, I know Gene and I talked about it in the postgame show. Before spring, didn't think it would be a big-time need. After spring, I'm willing to hear that case, and I'm very interested to see if the coaching staff attacks it that way.
Yeah, again, I like to define our terms as frequently as possible because in theory you have a new listening audience every 15 minutes and we continue to grow the Warchant empire and the Warchant TV empire to where the subscriber base gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And sometimes I need to remind myself that between radio listeners and TV listeners and podcast listeners and Warchant TV viewers and all that, that we've got some new people jumping on board and they may not have a great frame of reference to the way we operate, the way we think, and kind of the basics of where we're coming from. 2 years ago, we were talking about a program that had to take an obvious leap forward in order to kind of inject themselves in the conversation of up-and-coming recruits that are interested in your school. And the only way you can do that is to win some games. And can you get to a place where you're not having losing seasons and you're actually going to a bowl and you're showing forward momentum? And that happened. And then all of a sudden, not only did that happen, once you gained that foothold, you were able to then take another leap forward in the way of an undefeated season. So once you went 13-0, you knew then that the old standard of like, okay, we're just trying to scratch and claw our way back into being an over 500 program and sustain some sort of respectability. Then it became, can you be elite? Can you once again win the ACC, wrestle control of the conference away from Clemson, who had been on a long run, and we had been obviously put into second and third place and really not competitive. And then we wrestled control of the conference back from them. And now it becomes, can you win a national championship? That's the logical progression as you get better and better and better. So when we're talking about roster configuration and we're asking about the assets on the roster and the assets that are out there in the portal and how you piece these things together, it's all with the backdrop of understanding how Mike operates, what Mike likes to do on offense. We know the infrastructure. We understand the modus operandi. We also understand the way that they recruit the portal, the kind of kid that has to come in order to be a success and a fit in the locker room. So these are all things you're weighing when you're discussing what they do in the offseason. Once the portal opens at the end of the spring game or the spring showcase, where do you look to improve based on what the expectations are of fighting for, and this is something for the foreseeable future, I would say, fighting for championships, going to playoffs, winning the league, and competing to try to win the ultimate prize. So when you say, or if I say, because I tend to be very blunt, if I say that that guy is just not going to get it done, or I use the slang, he ain't any good, I'm talking about in reference to elite standards, not the average Joe playing football at East Tennessee State where a bum like me once played, right? Like, I'm talking about the elite levels. Like, do you match up with Ohio State, Georgia, Alabama, and the programs that we're seeking to defeat in order to go to the playoff and win a national title? So by that standard, Tom, I think they've got to find a tackle other than Byers. They better find another wide receiver. I think it would do them well to get another defensive tackle in here for depth purposes because I like the frontline starters and I like some of the rotation, but I think they could use another player. You can never have too much depth at defensive tackle. So by those standards, they've got some work to do. You might even argue, Tom, that they would need to, if they could find it, go out and get a tight end. They've got one in Morlock, who I think is a very good player. I think he's going to have a very good year. Thomas came in and is already a very good receiving tight end. I don't know that I can trust him to be a good inline blocker. Jackson West, if he's able to stay healthy, and that is a giant I and a giant F, is a guy that does have some talent. He's just never healthy. He looks the part of a Greek god. He's a nasty, nasty guy in terms of like getting after it when he is healthy. He'll push the line, and I like that about him. But you could maybe use another tight end that is game in, game out, ready to block. They don't know that they have that guy on the roster right now.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of those positions that I would list as luxury items if you're operating with a budget or space constrictions and things like that. There are some that go, to the top of the list, and I believe they're mandatory. As we're constructed right now, looking at the offense, this is an offense that must succeed running the football. If you add another receiver, you don't have to succeed running the football. Like last year's team did not have to, clearly. They hit explosives. They resembled Florida State from 2 seasons prior, 2021. Home runs and a lot of zeros and ones and twos. And that was enough because of the threat of Jordan, the receivers they had on the outside, the passing game in general. You were able to work backwards almost from what Mike Norvell wants to do. As it's currently constructed, you must be able to run the football. Because if you don't have the targets that can go generate, drives that and multiple drives across a half of football when you got to have it on their own. They're going to get open. They're going to make explosive plays. DJ drops back and throws, 2 times out of every 3 plays. I don't think they're constructed that way right now. You can change that a little bit when we do get into this window of the portal. But right now, what I saw is an offensive line that when the 2 SEC transfers are at guards is much better. They started it with Estes at left guard, and I think he's had a good camp and he's a good rotational player. But I liked when you have your Alabama guy and your Florida guy at left and right guard. That looked very nice to me. It looks sustainable. That looks like a good ground game. And then also I see speed on offense as well. There's a sequence where they did get Jalen Lucas loose. That they wanted to do that early in the scrimmage or the showcase, and they weren't able to do that. Then they have the jet sweep. Jalen Brown has a jet sweep right after that. You can see Malik Benson's got the speed. If Destin can ever come back, Toafili on the wheel route. Like, you're going to have a lot of speed options, and that's what Mike Norvell is excited about, and I like that. And there's physicality up on that offensive line, but you can't be a pass-first offense, I don't think, with what they have right now. If you'd like to get closer to balanced, then you should probably go dip into the portal and go grab yourself a receiver.
So the other part of this, and I want to comment on this because I think it's important now that we understand they're transitioning from one type of offense or within the realm of Mike's offense and aspects that he used a year ago and some other aspects that he's going to have to use this year that would really facilitate the need to go and bring in another offensive lineman. And I want to touch on this because it's kind of twofold, but we were just now kind of getting into all of this, and I just realized as I look up, I can't believe 21 minutes goes by that quick when we're passionate about Florida State football as we enter the offseason and portal time. It is the time to be passionate. Like, go get what you need. Think about what it was a year ago that you were able to do by kind of filling in the holes, right? These were things we were identifying, Tom. You recall, I was on these airwaves saying, we need to go get Keon Coleman if we can get Keon Coleman because we are not whole at wide receiver right now. We are not whole. Well, once again, we are not whole at wide receiver right now. And if there's a guy that's excited about playing here that has done it at that level, I'd certainly reciprocate. But I'd also do it on the offensive line and maybe on the defensive line.